In the 1970s, the open road was a symbol of freedom. For a generation defined by wanderlust, hitchhiking wasn't just a way to get from one place to another. It was a culture, a statement of trust in the kindness of strangers. But beneath this romantic notion lay a darker, often unspoken reality. The shoulder of the highway was a place of immense vulnerability, a threshold where a simple act of trust could lead to unforeseen and devastating consequences. Before we continue, a word of caution. The following story contains mature themes and descriptions of psychological and physical abuse that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. In May of 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan stood on the edge of such a road. She was on her way from her home in Oregon to California, heading to a friend's birthday party. An experienced hitchhiker, she'd made similar journeys before, without incident. She knew the unspoken rules. Trust your gut. Be wary of single men. Try to find a ride with a family. So when a blue van carrying a friendly-looking young couple and their baby pulled over, it felt like the safest possible option. The presence of the infant was profoundly disarming, a powerful symbol of normalcy and safety. Colleen felt a wave of relief and accepted the ride. That single, seemingly logical decision, made in a fraction of a second on the side of a lonely highway, would irrevocably alter the course of her life. It was a choice that would lead her into a 7-year nightmare, a story so bizarre and terrifying it defies belief. The couple introduced themselves as Cameron and Janice Hooker. The initial conversation was light, the atmosphere unremarkable as they travelled south. They eventually arrived at their home in Red Bluff, California, a quiet-looking house in a quiet-looking suburban neighborhood. But the moment the front door closed, the facade of safety shattered. The friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by something cold and predatory. Cameron pulled a knife. The glint of the blade in the dim light of the house was the last thing Colleen saw before her world plunged into darkness. What followed is something out of the most terrifying nightmares imaginable, a descent into a meticulously crafted hell of isolation and control. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken threat. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, every shadow deepening, every sound muffled. A new reality was beginning, one built on fear and silence, hidden behind a suburban door. Cameron Hooker's control over Colleen Stan was absolute, and its most terrifying instrument was a simple wooden box. He constructed it himself, a coffin-like container designed not just for confinement, but for the complete erasure of a person. He locked Colleen inside this box, sliding it under the bed he shared with his wife Janice. For the next 7 years, this would be her world for up to 23 hours a day. The box was an engineering marvel of cruelty. It was small, hot, and almost completely airless, barely larger than her own body. She couldn't stand, couldn't sit up, couldn't even fully stretch her limbs. Movement was a luxury, measured in inches. Often she was left in total suffocating darkness, the lid secured from the outside. The only air came from a few small holes, a meagre offering that did little to combat the rising heat and the stench of her own confinement. Inside, the heat was a physical presence. It built relentlessly, drawing sweat that beaded and slid down her skin with no way to wipe it away. The air grew thin and stale, burning in her lungs with every shallow breath. Her prison was just inches from their normal life. She could hear the muffled thuds of footsteps, the creak of the bed springs above, the faint drone of their voices. This proximity was its own form of torture, a constant, unbearable reminder of the world she was denied, a world that continued on without her, just beyond the wood. A pinprick of light from a vent hole would become her sun, its brief appearance a major event in a day otherwise defined by blackness. When someone passed by, the light would wink out, swallowing her again in the disorienting dark. In the sensory vacuum of the box, time lost all meaning. Days and nights blurred into one long, indistinguishable moment. Her own heartbeat and the distant muffled ticking of a clock became the only anchors to reality, the rhythm of her suspended existence. In this state, the mind begins to break. The isolation was a weapon, reinforcing Hooker's narrative that the company was always watching, that there was no escape. The world outside the box ceased to feel real. And in the rare moments a shaft of light caught the dust motes dancing in the stale air, it was a ghost of the life she'd lost, a flicker of a hope she fought desperately to keep alive. Cameron began by weaving a terrifying fiction, a story designed to dismantle Colleen's reality and replace it with his own. He told her that he wasn't acting alone. He claimed to be part of a powerful, clandestine organization he called the Company. This shadowy group, he explained, was everywhere and saw everything. They had selected her, and now she was their property. The threat was absolute and chillingly specific. If she ever tried to escape or even disobeyed an order, the Company wouldn't just come for her. They would hunt down her family, her parents, her sisters, and subject them to unimaginable torture before killing them. He made it clear that her compliance was the only thing keeping her loved ones safe. This single, elaborate lie became the cornerstone of her captivity, a psychological cage built from fear and a young woman's love for her family. To make the threat feel real, Cameron constructed an elaborate theatre of intimidation. He produced official-looking documents, files filled with what he claimed was surveillance on her family, and binders detailing the brutal punishments the Company meted out to those who defied them. He would stage phone calls, speaking in code to his supposed superiors, creating the illusion of a vast, invisible network, monitoring their every move. These props weren't just paper and plastic. They were instruments of psychological warfare, each one reinforcing the lie and making the invisible threat of the Company feel terrifyingly tangible. For Colleen, the world she knew dissolved into a fog of terror. Her eyes clamped shut, but the images Cameron painted were burned into her mind. A tremor of pure, unadulterated fear betrays the storm raging within her. How could she fight an enemy she couldn't see? How could she risk her family's lives on the slim chance of escape? In that moment, her will to resist was paralyzed, caught between the instinct for self-preservation and the terrifying weight of responsibility for her family's safety. Over the days, weeks and months that followed, he brainwashed her completely. This wasn't a single act, but a slow, methodical erosion of her identity. He used classic techniques of coercive control, isolating her from any external point of reference and systematically gaslighting her, making her question her own perceptions, her memories, and her sanity. The constant, unrelenting pressure was designed to break her down, to make her utterly dependent on him for her understanding of the world. The manipulation culminated in a horrifying document, a so-called slave contract. Forcing her to sign it was a masterstroke of psychological cruelty, a formal declaration that her life was no longer her own. The contract stripped her of her most basic human rights. She was forbidden from speaking unless spoken to. Her name was taken from her, replaced by a number. He controlled when she ate, what she wore, when she slept, and when she bathed. Every aspect of her existence was dictated by a schedule he created. He framed his horrific abuse as training, a necessary process to make her a compliant and useful asset for the company. All the while, he relentlessly reinforced the lie that their invisible masters were watching, approving of his methods and her submission. Her days became a monotonous loop of domestic chores, performed under his ever-watchful eye. Between these tasks, he enforced her total isolation, denying her any contact with the outside world. Every interaction was a test of her obedience. Any hesitation, any perceived refusal, was met with threats of brutal punishment, not just for her, but for her family, a constant reminder that her every move was being monitored and judged by the company. She learned to live as if a hidden gaze was always upon her. She moved carefully, her posture timid, her eyes constantly scanning for unseen watchers. The silence was the worst part, a suffocating blanket of control where even an unauthorized word could bring catastrophic consequences. She was a prisoner in plain sight, trapped not by locks and bars, but by a meticulously crafted web of fear. And when she wasn't serving him, his hands would guide her back to the box. The wooden lid would inch toward shut, slowly extinguishing the light and the world with it. This was her reality for up to 23 hours a day. Blackness returns. In the suffocating dark, the only connection to the world outside was the sound of life continuing without her. Muffled steps, the distant murmur of a television. These faint sounds were a torturous reminder of the freedom she had lost, as she lay waiting in the dark for her captor's next command. What's even more horrifying? At one point, Cameron let her visit her family. She hugs at the doorway, smiles strained, eyes hollow. She was so conditioned and terrified that she went, smiled, had dinner, and returned willingly with her captor. Her family thought she had joined some kind of strange religious group. Taillights fade through fields, night swallows the road. An empty bedroom lingers. A chair keeps silent vigil. Inside the box, the lid lowers. The last light dies. After years of being abused herself and fearful for their child, Janice grew jealous, sought guidance at church, and decided to end it. In 1984, she told Colleen the truth. There was no company. The threat had been a lie. With Janice's help, Colleen left, contacted her family and cut ties, choosing safety over the lies that had trapped her. She steps into daylight, wind lifts hair, freedom near, open road and sky, she tastes wide, clean air. Under the bed, the box sits open. Emptiness echoes. Cameron Hooker received 104 years in prison, convicted for kidnapping and sexual assault, standing as a chilling example of how manipulation can imprison without chains. Headlines and documents trace the case with sober clarity. A single chair waits. The room remembers a box. Through a tiny vent, a beam hangs, dust swirling. Colleen Stan survived, but what she endured in that box is beyond comprehension. Hold on, Black. Let the final chord fade.